The Nets entered the game with the magic number of 2 to secure the 6th seed in the Eastern Conference heading into the playoffs. The Nets ended the game with a magic number of 2 after falling and close to a heartbreaker to the Minnesota Timberwolves at home. We're going to talk about the final sequences, what the Nets did to stay in this game, how they squandered a lead when it was all said and done, and where the playoff situation sits as we enter just a few games left in the regular season. We're going to get all into that next. But first, theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome back to the Locked On Nets podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, headed for the playoffs every single day. I am Doug Norrie, the owner-operator, you know this one already, of DFSR.com. That's Daily Fantasy Sports Rankings.com. If you need some projections for our friends over at FanDuel, go over to DFSR.com. Grab yourself a free 7-day trial. You'll like what you see over there. You'll be sticking with us for the long term. One of the longest DFS outlets there is. No Adam Armbrecht on the podcast today or the YouTube stream today. He's taking this one off. That's no biggie. He covered here over on Sunday, and he gets to not have to talk about where the Nets still stand when it comes to the playoff race, because the Nets went into this game against Minnesota with a 2-game magic number, or the magic number of 2, to secure the 6th seed in the East, to stay out of the play-in game, the all-important play-in game. And that's why the 6th seed at this point is such an important just number to have. You not have to play extra games to get into playoffs. Nets control their own fate here. They need to, they own the tiebreaker against the Heat. The Heat were playing against Detroit. Nets have to win 2 games over these final 4, well, now final 3, to secure that slot. They were not able to get it done against the Timberwolves. The Heat did win the game. We'll go through some of the playoff stuff a little bit later on the show. But this one, they're, from that standpoint, from where the Nets stand in the standings and from what needs to happen for them to kind of breathe easy around not having to play extra games going into the play. And this game did take on some pretty, important ramifications. The Nets were at home against a Minnesota team who, to their own credit, wants to win here also. They're in a dogfight for when it comes to what's happening over there in the Western Conference. Going into this one, we knew the Nets were going to be up against it. For the most part, Minnesota's getting healthy. We've seen at times where they've been able to start putting together some of the Towns Gobert pairing. We'll talk about that a little bit as well. But we knew that this was not going to be a rollover kind of game. There's a softer landing here for the final few games on the Nets schedule. But we just knew that this one wasn't going to be one of them. This Minnesota team wants to make the playoffs. This Minnesota team has a lot of talent. They had played a really close one against Minnesota only a few weeks ago that we know the Nets finally won in overtime, and that was without Karl Anthony Towns. So we knew this game was going to be tough. There was still very much a feeling here, and very much even in game, where the Nets had this one. This game was won. Now, I know everyone's going to want to get in here on the final sequences of the game with Spencer Dinwiddie and whether or not he was fouled on the 3-point attempt, which could have sent it to overtime. Or sent him to the line at least with a few seconds left. But very much what looked like a foul from Anthony Edwards on the on the release, or excuse me, right before the release. It looks like Edwards caught Dinwiddie with the left hand. And I think that the Nets have a legit gripe when it comes to that. We know Spencer Dinwiddie is not exactly new to complaining about fouls. It's sometimes hard to trust his reactions and his histrionics when it comes to things that happen to him on shots. I think on that one, he has a legit gripe. He was fouled for sure. The refs missed that one. The Nets had already used their challenge, which I think was a smart challenge. They used it on the Dorian Finney-Smith kicked ball. You don't know where these things are going to land. It's best to try to use your challenges in leverage situations. That Finney-Smith one, even though it looked pretty obvious, was a quick call in a leverage situation. Nets did not have a challenge left to go, and they weren't able to appeal that final shot. I'm not sure they would have been able. I'm not sure they could have actually appealed that anyway. And yeah, Dinwiddie has a legit gripe on it. I think he definitely was fouled. And then they obviously missed the final 3 from the corner. Decent look, not amazing, not too. I thought the first look was pretty good. Second one was they weren't able to draw anything up because they were out of timeouts. And ultimately, the shot did not go in. I do want to say, though, I know people are going to want to focus on the lack of foul right there on Dinwiddie and get sort of just, I don't know, microscopic. I guess it's not microscopic, but really use that as the reason for the Nets losing this game, possibly. And while I do think that the gripe is legitimate, and while I do think he was fouled, it does kind of wash away the fact that the Nets were up 11 in this game in the third quarter and let the Wolves get all the way back into the game. Not to say that the game is won when you're up double digits in the third quarter. These games in the current NBA, those kinds of leads can disappear pretty quickly. We know teams can come back really quickly, just the pace of the game, 3-pointers. There's a lot of different things that can factor in to erasing an 11-point lead with essentially 20 minutes of game clock left to go, because that was about 8 minutes where the Nets had the 11-point lead. But the part where we focus in on the possible Dinwiddie foul in the closing sequences and forget the part where the Nets were at home with a double-digit lead, midway or partway through the third quarter, it is easy to start forgetting that. And that's ultimately what happened. They allowed Minnesota to get some good looks. I did think strategically what the Nets were doing was mostly correct. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the podcast, but I don't want people to focus so much on those last couple seconds of the game and sort of miss the forest for the trees when it comes to the Nets. Had this game. They had a double-digit lead. They were up 11. They had a chance to kind of step on the Wolves' neck, and they weren't able to do it. And so when you combine those two things, when you combine that piece and then the part where you feel like maybe they got jobbed a little bit at the end of the game, this one, it stings a little bit. Would it have been nice to walk into the final 3 games of the season with just a 1-game magic number, win one of these games against these there's 2 lottery teams are going to play, and then we'll see where Philly ultimately ends up when it's all said and done. It would have been nice to walk out of this game with a 1-game magic number, breathe a little easy, say to yourself, hey, it's not going to take much here over the last couple to make it to the playoffs, and know that maybe we get to the Philly game and not have to worry about it. But ultimately, the Nets weren't able to pull it out. Do have a lot I want to discuss. I want to talk strategically around what the Nets did, I think, well in certain parts of this game, some things that got away from them, parts of the game where, I thought it was close, but I think that X's and O's wise, I was pretty into what the Nets were trying to do on a higher level, even with a game that ultimately did get away from them in the end in disappointing fashion. Going to get into all of that here in a second. First, for a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you'll be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know the part will fill it or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. All right, things that went well for the Nets in this game, things that did not go well. So when you play a team like Minnesota, you know that you're going up against something of a unique opponent. They have 2 huge guys in Karl-Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert. They went for the Twin Towers approach. We know that Towns has missed a ton of time this season. So we haven't actually gotten great looks at what ultimately they thought the probably end product was going to be, although they finally did get it in this game. As you know, Towns didn't play in the game before when the Nets played, and that was when Naz Reid was able to hit that sort of buzzer, that buzzer beater 3 and send it to overtime where the Nets were able to win. I do think the Nets approach in this game was ultimately correct. They were mostly focused on a few different elements of trying to attack against Minnesota, which is always going to be a tricky situation when you have a guy like Gobert, who's an elite rim protector, one of the best just opposing defensive players in the game, and clearly one of the best defensive centers we've seen in quite some time. And you have Towns, who's bad at defense, and the Nets were going to try to take advantage of a couple of different elements of this Wolves team that I think they did have actually a pretty clear advantage. It's not too dissimilar to what we saw them do the first time around, which was attacking key parts of this Minnesota defense and trying to just take advantage of what the Nets can do decently well, which is attack at the rim with a guy like Dinwiddie, attack in the mid range and off the dribble with Mikal Bridges. And those were the two pieces, or, at least create mismatches where you're going to be able to create some spacing around those two guys. And I think for the most part, the Nets strategy along those lines was correct. We saw them on offense hunting out Gobert consistently. They hunted out Karl Anthony Towns consistently. They wanted to get that slow-mo Kyle Anderson switch onto Spencer Dinwiddie. Very, very similar to what we saw when they played the last game, which was really just trying to isolate those three guys in space and work all of them off the dribble. I think that was correct. I think that when you're dealing with a team like Minnesota that has a lot of length on defense, even if Karl Anthony Towns is, completely sub-average defender, a bad defender, all things considered, that was the right way to go. And for the most part, it kind of worked. I mean, they were able to play Gobert off of the court for stretches just because Minnesota didn't want to keep getting him put into isolation. And when you get him into even a drop coverage, guy like Mikal Bridges, who's really, really good in the mid-range, is going to be able to take advantage of that as well. So I thought strategically what the Nets were doing on that end of the court, even though the points did not come in bunches. I mean, the Nets only scored 102 points in this one. Some of that is the pace of play, just there where the pace of this game was not very fast. They shoot 37% from three. Did have some decent looks that didn't go down. Joe Harris rimmed out a couple. Spencer rimmed out one of these. Sometimes you tend to count those ones a little more when they're happening with your team than with other teams. I totally get that. There were a couple just close ones here that maybe could have just shifted the overall landscape of this game. But from a strategic side of this, I do think this is the way that I think the Nets were correct in this approach. Results are not there. Obviously, they lost. So that's sometimes hard to look at a game and say, hey, was this, the right way to go when the result isn't the way you wanted it? I do think ultimately it was. And like I said, they were able to get Gobert off the court. They had to end up playing Kyle Anderson a little bit more. He played 32 minutes off the bench. They had to go a little more wing stuff with Taurean Prince, Taurean Prince. And I was going to say Taurean Prince Smith. I was going to combine the two names there with old friend Taurean Prince. And we did see a little NAW here, but I think that the Nets I think they had a game plan going into this game. I know they did. It was very clear what they were trying to run were these actions to get these bigs isolated, because they knew the guys like Dinwiddie and guys like Bridges are going to be able to beat those matchups most of the time. And I think a lot of the times they did. They had good looks that didn't go down. Timberwolves had a couple nice recovery blocks where was clear that the Nets had already gained the advantage. And ultimately, Bridges shoots 9 for 24 from the field, inefficient nights. Some of them were not amazing looks, but he missed a couple ones that we've seen go down for him a decent amount in this time since he's been with the Nets. And sometimes that's just the way the game is going to go. You're not going to just go out there and be hyper efficient like he's been every single game. And unfortunately, this was one of those games where he shoots somewhat poorly from the field. 9 for 24 is just not one of the better games on his ledger. And not to say that that's the reason they lost, but I guess what I'm saying is when you look at this strategically and say, were you getting a lot of the shots that you wanted? I think they were. I think they were getting a lot of the looks that they wanted with the guys like Mikal in the mid-range, trying to get to the rim when they were able to beat the primary defender. And ultimately, the shots didn't go down. And sometimes it's a make or miss league. And sometimes it's not always as easy as, hey, did your shots go in or your shots didn't? If your shots don't go in, you're not going to win. I get that part of it. But where the Nets were trying to attack on the offensive end, I think if they were to play this game again, knowing, sort of what they know and going into the game with a kind of strategy, I think we would see a lot of the same. And I think that would be correct. I think that would be the way that you would want to probably see this go. And I think you would probably get a situation where, Mikal's 13 for 24 or something like that. And all of a sudden you're in a situation where you're winning the game. They probably could have gotten a few more foul calls. I think the Nets had a couple legitimate gripes when it came to that beyond just the Dinwiddie 3-pointer at the end. So I think there were other pieces of the game that just didn't necessarily go their way. But ultimately, it was like somewhat of a rock fight at 107, 102. It didn't totally feel like that because of the pace of the game. But, it wasn't a high scoring affair, but it didn't feel like it was lack of high scoring because it was just kind of garbagey offense. I think the game ultimately just slowed down a lot. And I guess that slightly favors Minnesota, and not totally, but when it came down to hitting shots, they were able to in key moments, and the Nets weren't. But again, just to reiterate, I do think what they were trying to do offensively made a lot of sense, and defensively. Look, the Nets are going into this game without the same kind of requisite size that Minnesota has. They're starting Gobert and they're starting Karl Anthony Towns, and the Nets don't have a ton of size to compete with that. They have Claxton. They're playing. We saw a little bit of Sharp at the beginning. They played Dorian Finney-Smith at the 5 a lot because they wanted to go super small. We saw Minnesota trying to seal off Gobert and Towns, specifically Gobert early. Like they wanted to get that switch and seal on the pick and roll as much as they possibly could. They were able to get it a lot. They know that the Nets are going to switch those actions almost exclusively. And if you're going to switch the pick and roll defender and the guy's going to end up on Gobert, if you rewatch especially early times in this game, you'll see pick and roll, dive, seal off, and they're trying to get him, in the paint with the ball against guys like Dinwiddie at his back, or guys, even Mikal, like guys like Royce O'Neal, we saw end up in this matchup a few times. And that I thought the Nets ultimately, because they were never going to just create size, or at least the size that they wanted, I thought the Nets did a decently admirable job there. But obviously, some rebounding issues come into play here, and it's going to be hard to contend with just the kind of bigs that the Minnesota had. But again, do I think it was like some crazy advantage for Minnesota? I don't think it was. Like I thought the Nets strategy there was pretty good. It's like, hey, Rudy Gobert is not a dynamic offensive player. If you want to get a seal on him, we're just going to keep staying physical with him, and we'll just kind of live with what ends up happening. And I think the Nets did do that to a certain degree, to the point again where Gobert got played off the court. Yeah, they struggled with Towns a little bit in the open space, not tons. Like I don't think Towns was amazing here against the Nets. 22 points, 14 rebounds, 31 minutes. I think you'll live with that, especially knowing what the Nets personnel is defensively. So ultimately, I think both ends of the court, it's hard to find too many flaws, I think, with what happened here. Again, always hard to say when you lose a game. Always hard, sort of squint and see it when you say to yourself, hey, we lost the game. Are we giving out compliments here? It's not so much that. It's just that I think that if you, like to reiterate what I said on the offensive end and the defensive end as well, I think if you played this game again, I think it would be correct to take a similar approach that the Nets took here, because I think more times than not, that kind of approach has this game something like even and a close game down to the end. And I think that sometimes when you're playing another good team, Minnesota's 40-40 on the season, even without Towns for long stretches. That is kind of what you're looking at in a game like this. So ultimately don't have a ton of qualms with how the Nets approach this one on either end of the court. Obviously would have liked a different result, but that is just sometimes how the old basketball cookie crumbles. In a second, going to just take a quick look at where the Nets playoff seeding, just where they are in the playoff race here after some of the results from Tuesday night, because there's developing something of a clear picture of what's happening when it comes to that. We will get into all of that in a second. First, going to tell you about our friends over on FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are almost here, and we want the Nets to be in there. It's the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. New customers on FanDuel are going to get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. A lot of zeros there, baby. For $1,000 with that no sweat first bet for FanDuel. It's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download this FanDuel Sportsbook app. Safe, secure, super easy to use. You can bet on everything from the money line to point scores, threes, drain, rebound, over-unders, points, assists, like really everything you could ever imagine. Start imagining stuff that you can get in there on FanDuel, and FanDuel is going to have even more. You can put together stuff for the championship already. You can even go into matchups of what you like. If you already want to think about some setup that you want to see from the Eastern and Western conferences, FanDuel's got all those futures up there as well. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout. That's with the same game parlay. Don't miss the chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. It's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right. Closing this thing out, taking a look at where things stand when it comes to playoff seeding. Some things were crystallized here going into the final few games of the season. Nets have 3 games remaining. They play Detroit here on the back-to-back on Wednesday. Hopefully that game is a win after knowing sort of what Detroit brings to the table. Friday against Orlando, Sunday against Philly. So where do things stand for the Nets? Right now, they are 43-36. They are a game up in the loss column on the Heat, but we know they own the tiebreaker with the Heat, so they are technically 2 games above them because, if the Heat can't jump them unless they just have a straight-up better record. The Heat did beat Detroit this evening. Detroit's bad, but they hung with the Heat here. The game was within 3 points with 2 minutes left to go. Had both screens up, watching both these games because we're definitely scoreboard or real game watching with what the Heat are doing at this point. But the Heat were able to beat Detroit, took care of business there. Nets get to play that same Detroit team. You would hope they walk away with that one with a win. You hope they're able to beat Orlando. Even though Orlando did beat them just a few games ago. And hopefully, that's the end of the story when it goes into that final game against Philly. Right now, Philly did just beat Boston. As I'm recording this, they squeezed that one out 103-101. So Philly is looking at a situation where one of the hopes that we had going into that final game was that Philly's fate would be sealed. It's not technically as of right now. They are, because actually it's not so much that they can catch Boston, it's that there's a chance Cleveland is somewhere in here too. So I do think by the time they get to that final game, Philly will just be locked into the 3 seed and there won't be too much to worry about. You would have liked to see Boston take care of business here, but what are you going to do? I do think by the time it's all said and done, we'll see the Sixers with the 3 seed, and hopefully that last game against the Nets is just a throwaway game. Now, the hope there is it's just a throwaway game for both teams, right? You're just like, oh, maybe this is just the last game of the season and everyone can sort of rest on their laurels. Is it going to be like that for the Nets? I'm not sure. Should they beat Detroit and Orlando back-to-back here? One would think so. Now, the Heat do play Philly on Thursday. We're going to be really rooting for Philly in that one. Like, that's the game where you're staring at yourself and say, hey, if we're going to ever root for the Sixers, let's root for them against Miami on Thursday night, April 6th, because if Philly's able to take care of business there, then I think the Nets can totally breathe easy. If they're able to beat Detroit here on Wednesday, we tune into the Philly game against Miami, hope that Philly is able to take that one out as they, try to maintain and just solidify where they stand in the 3 seed. Away you go, and it's all done. Could be wishful thinking. But if we're trying to figure out how things are going to play out along those lines, I think that's a scenario that you can really sink your teeth into. After that, with the Knicks winning tonight, the Nets are not going to be able to catch the Knicks, so that one is sealed. The Knicks are going to be the 5th seed. They locked that one up with the Nets losing here, so the 5th seed dreams are gone for the Nets. Now it's really 6th seed or bust for Brooklyn. And look, the way this is going to shake out, if we're just being realistic, if we're looking at this just from a number standpoint, with the games left, with who Miami has to play, are then Brooklyn Nets going to have the 6th seed? It sure looks like it. Like, it really, really looks like that's going to be the case. Have we been taught when it comes to rooting for Brooklyn to not expect anything or to not take, or just make sure we don't take things for granted? Yeah, definitely. This team has been nothing if not heartbreakers over multiple seasons now. So it's not like we built up some kind of I think we built up if anything, as Nets folks here, we build up collective callousing against the pain that sometimes comes with some of these situations. We've not come to just like stare here and just expect that the thing that should happen or that numbers wise says is going to happen when we're prognosticating is going to happen. No, look, the Nets have not done anything to have any goodwill along those lines. We've been multiple seasons of disappointment. So are we going to be nail biting a little bit here going into the final 3 games? Yeah, I think so. I think that you hope that just things work out the way they should against Detroit. Detroit is a bad team. Hopefully they're even more in the tank than they have been before, even though they scraped and clawed a little bit with Miami here on Wednesday. But look, go out, take care of business Wednesday, see what happens with Philly and Miami on Thursday. And maybe we're not even sweating the final 2 games. But we also know these are the Brooklyn Nets, baby. And the Brooklyn Nets don't always give you exactly what you want in the timeline that you want it. That's just how things end up rolling. Okay. Going to be a fun last couple of games of the season here. Hopefully it does not go down to the wire where the Brooklyn Nets are concerned. Adam and I will be back with a couple more podcasts this week. We're going to do live after the game on Detroit Wednesday evening, so make sure you are tuning in for that one. If you're over on YouTube, you know that we're always jumping into live post-game stuff on YouTube. Much appreciated, everyone that's jumping over here on Locked On Nets YouTube. I see the questions. If you want to throw some questions in there for the bonus stuff afterwards, I'll definitely stick around and answer that. If you're listening on the podcast, I don't know what to tell you. You got to be over on YouTube. This is where it's happening. The podcast doesn't go up until the next day. YouTube, baby, right after the game, every single time. That is just how we roll. So much appreciated for everyone jumping over there, YouTube Live, and make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets over at YouTube Live. Adam is always the one that comes with the quotes here from the great all-time American poets. Always the perfect choice of words to close out an episode. That's what Adam Armbrecht brings, among many other things that he brings to the podcast. He's always coming in there with the quotes to end it off. I always forget. I always get to this part of the podcast when it's me solo. Got too many other wheels turning and pieces moving. Forget the quote. So we'll just say that Adam is one of the all-time great American poets, and we will be back again tomorrow and in a second over on YouTube with more Brooklyn Nets basketball. All right, podcast. I see folks in here in the chat. Much appreciated. See some new names, some old faithful names in here. Always much appreciated. Everyone over on YouTube, especially. It's always tough a little bit coming in after the losses, especially when the losses and the wins start meaning a little bit more down the stretch, which is definitely what they're feeling like now. It does feel like we're not in a live and die situation with every game, but it's like I wouldn't mind breathing a little easier when it comes to some of these games. If you have a question that you specifically want brought up here on the podcast or on YouTube to get thrown up here, definitely just put in at Locked On Nets. I'm going to scroll through and see what I see here. If anyone had put one in there already, much apologies if you did. It's a little hard to manage running through the whole podcast and making sure I cover everything with the notes and everything, and also reading through the chat. Not able to do that. When Adam's here, no problem. Just when he talks, just ignore him. Just ignore him and read what's going on in the comments, and just wait for his voice to kind of end, and then I just chime in with an idea. Now, can't do that when you're rolling solo on the podcast. So if you have a question on YouTube, make sure you throw it in there, put it at Locked On Nets. It'll catch my eye. A couple of the things that I didn't talk about in the podcast, and maybe Adam and I will get to a little bit later on. I'll probably talk a little bit about this tomorrow. I've seen enough. No more Seth Curry, Joe Harris lineups. Please have this be the end. It's too much. They only did it for 3 minutes tonight because Curry only played 3 minutes. Harris ended up playing 15. Couple real close 3-pointers for him that didn't go down. He did hit a big one that I thought was going to kind of turn the tide for them, but it ended up not. But these Curry Harris lineups are so terrible. Like I can't even watch it. They're so brutal. The numbers on them. Curry plus Harris with no Durant and no Kyrie. That's like they're like negative 15 possessions per 100. Like it's so bad. The net rating is so bad with those combinations. I do not know why Jacques Vaughn and company still. I was complimentary. I thought of what their strategy was overall tonight. I guess in my eye. Overall, what was happening sort of strategically, but that's just the one thing that I just will not ever understand. It's like, what do they see trying to put these guys together? It's like two massive defensive liabilities. Neither of them can, Seth kind of can a little bit. Neither of them can create enough on offense to make it worth it. It just, these lineups get totally brutalized. Other opposing offensive guys just light up knowing that they're going to get one of these two dudes in the switch, preferably Seth. It's just terrible. So, there was only 3 minutes of it tonight. I hope there's 0 more minutes of this combination going forward. I can't stand it. And I don't know. That's all I got to say about these Curry these Curry and Harris lineups. Brendan, I feel like when Cam Thomas gets playing time, he doesn't prove why he deserves more. I will say, look, he played 5 minutes tonight. It was awful 5 minutes. I get he's a rhythm guy, and it's really tough. He plays so sporadically. His particular style of game does not really benefit from just like really short bursts. Like, I think he is a guy that kind of needs to feel his way into it. He obviously is a high usage dude. He had some. It was the 5 minutes were awful. And a couple examples from this. He had twice. Once he had to be like basically coaxed, and I'm actually worrying a little bit about his confidence here. He had to be coaxed into getting Gobert into the switch, where he finally did, because it's exactly what you want. Like, you want Cam to have Gobert on him because he should be able to beat him at all three levels at that point, and kind of needed to be coaxed into it. He had that twice, and the second shot looked even worse than the first. Defensively, he was a complete and utter turnstile for the 5 minutes. He's got his man scored twice on 2 consecutive possessions. It was a really rough 5 minutes from Cam. Again, I don't think it's totally his fault. Like, he doesn't play a lot, and it's hard for his particular kind of guy to come in and just expect them to be just kind of like total microwave. I get it that I'm not blaming him necessarily. I don't necessarily think like he's done tons to prove he should play more. So I don't know if it's necessarily wrong to like that they're not playing him. This would have been, I thought, like a pretty good matchup for him, but it just looked really, really bad. I'm not surprised we didn't see him again for another rotation. But yeah, I thought the 5 minutes for him were pretty darn rough. I don't know what to do with him at this point. I don't know what their plan is. There are times where it's looked really great. There are times when it looks horrible, or not horrible, but it looks just underwhelming. And like, you're not confused why he's not playing. Like, if you watch his 5 minutes tonight, like, you're not confused at all about why he's not playing. But they could really use guys like him. Like, they struggle with offensive creation. They struggle with just like on ball kind of stuff. This is why Dinwiddie has to play tons of minutes, as Royce is essentially the backup point guard. I'm just not sure he's the answer. So I don't know. I get that he needs a lot of shots, like, but you're just not always going to get them. And it's not like him taking tons of shots is like what you want for your team either. And so it's just a pretty confusing situation, I think. But after watching him tonight, I'm like not surprised he's not playing more, and I'm not sure he's being put in a perfect situation for him either. So I don't know. I think the Nets are kind of caught in a rock and a hard place here. I think, like, if they were out of the playoffs, I think we'd see him playing a lot, because they want to make the 6th seed. I don't think you can run him out there for like 25 minutes a game. It's just not good enough. And especially in a situation like in some of these like high leverage ones, it's just not. I don't think he's shown that like that's where you want to go with your minutes when they're pretty finite. That's my opinion on it. But yeah, I don't really know what the situation is with him. It hasn't looked good. It hasn't looked good though. Because here's the thing: if the shot's not going down, like, there's nothing else there for you. Like, he's not a cutter. He doesn't have great court vision. He's too small to see over defenders. He's bad on defense. Like, if the shots aren't going in, there really isn't a great reason to do it. Look, it's not like Curry's minutes were terrible too. Like, I don't think he should be playing. Could you make a case that he should play over Curry? Probably. That'd be something I could be talked into easily. But in terms of like him being some like great savior for the franchise or like whatever, or should be playing tons right now, no, I can't really see it. And I'm not totally shocked. I'm not totally shocked that this is sort of how it has unfolded. I don't know if I think Jacques Vaughn's done like a terrible job here. Like, I don't know. I thought the strategy they had tonight was fine. What are you going to do against this team? I thought that he played the rotations correctly for the most part, outside of that Curry Harris thing that they gave up on thankfully quickly. Like, I think everything else here was, I talked about this, for 6 or 7 minutes in the middle of the podcast. I thought most of the strategically what they were doing in here was pretty correct. I don't have a lot of qualms with it. I think that they were attacking the right holes in the defense. I think they were working into the switches that they wanted to get pretty consistently. I thought defensively, they mostly had the right idea, leave open shooters, collapse the lane. When you got to get a seal off, bringing some help on the bigs, letting some of these other guys just shoot if need be, like let the Kyle Andersons of the world shoot threes if that's what's going to happen. McDaniels shoot threes. They made some of them. Like I thought strategically, I just don't have a problem with what Jacques Vaughn did here. Do I think they have buyer's remorse? No, I don't think the Nets operate like that with remorse. I think they like Vaughn. I think they like what he brings. I think that he's a pretty steady hand. I think that's pretty important for this franchise to have now, which is consistency. Even if you don't love every single move that he makes, I think that they value like I said, the confidence, the steady hand piece. I think that's important for where this team is transition wise. I don't think bringing in a new face of an organization, a coach, would have been like totally the right move for where they are in like this stage of their timeline. So I think that this actually organizationally made sense. Do I think they have buyer's remorse? No. Do I think the Nets are like on a championship timeline over the next 2 or 3 years? Absolutely not. And so I just don't see the problem. I get that people don't like them, I guess, and I get that people don't like some of the results or whatever, but I think it's hard to like poke a ton of holes until like what he's done outside of a few confusing lineup things. And I think most coaches have problems with that. And maybe you say to yourself, if he plays the veterans a little too much when they shouldn't be, I can hear that. Like, I think some of these guys some of the wrong guys are playing at times. I'd love to see more Sumner. Like Sumner's minutes have been awesome this year. The 3-man lineup is Sumner, O'Neal, and Claxton's like the third best 3-man lineup that they have outside of non-KD stuff. So yeah, I'd like to see a little more Sumner. I don't think any of these things are like fireable offenses though. Like I think people are a little too quick with that kind of trigger in terms of wanting to see guys out or see guys fire. Like I don't think Vaughn's like, what's Vaughn done that's like fireable or like get him out of his contract? Like I'd love to hear examples of what you think those things are, like these macro huge wrong moves. Like they've unlocked Bridges. Like, does he get any credit for like what Mikal Bridges has done on offense here? Like probably should get some. That seems to be something that just was like a foregone conclusion. I don't think that's the case. Like, I think like does Vaughn get any credit for what's happening here? Is he get any credit for like the development of Dinwiddie's game? Like how good Dinwiddie's looked at times on offense. Like, does they get any credit for that stuff? He should. Like this stuff's all also happening on his watch, right? Like where guys are exceeding expectations. I think this roster is completely flawed. And I guess I just don't understand like this thing, like someone saying bad lineups. Like what lineups do you want? Like I'd love to hear the lineups. I said, okay, I admit that the Curry Harris one is bad. That lasted for 3 minutes tonight. Like what lineups do people want to see? I think you can see a little more Sumner, right? I think there's a little more and a little less of things you could see, but I thought like going small with DFS at the 5 was the right move in this game. Like those are smart coaching decisions. How they were playing off the Gobert switches is smart. Like I just don't know. I just don't get it. You're making me what's happening here? I'm defending Jacques Vaughn on a long time thing here. I don't know. I just don't see. I just don't totally agree. I think the easy thing that people want to do sometimes is bash the coaching without maybe fully understanding like the full like sort of organizational structure and stuff. And maybe the Nets haven't bought themselves any goodwill when that's concerned. Like the Nash thing was pretty much sucked, but I don't think Vaughn is a problem. I don't think that's what it is. You want to say like this current roster is flawed? Yeah, they traded Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving and got back guys that, they got back draft picks and they got a young possible superstar back, and it's not going to be perfect. Like they reformed things mid-season knowing that they weren't going to win the championship. Like the roster is totally flawed. So I don't know, blame Marks maybe, but I think that really no one deserves tons of blame there because that's just kind of like what it is. And I don't know. Didn't think I was going to end up defending Jacques Vaughn there for 5 minutes, but hey, you never know what's going to happen. All right. If anyone's got some other stuff in here that they want to throw up, I got that one about Vaughn. Talked a little Cam Thomas. Talked a little bit about some of the lineups. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's just where we're going to call for the tonight. Okay. Much appreciated everyone here that jumped into YouTube and So I see a question here. Say got killed in the paint and refused to play Claxton. The not playing Claxton was smart. Like here, I'll throw this one up here. I thought this was like a smart decision to not play Claxton. Like I think they was smart to go small against. You got Gobert off the court. Like you got their best interior defender completely off the court. That's what you kind of want to do. And when they went essentially 5 out to end of the game, like that was correct. Like why is that wrong? Why is that wrong to do? So I don't know. I guess I just don't see it. I thought that the decisions here were pretty correct. And when you say they got killed in the paint, like I agree. Like they didn't get completely murdered on the boards, 37-33. The offensive rebounding, which is usually a problem for the Nets, was basically even. Points in the paint, yeah, 58-46. They've always kind of had problems with this. Like I don't think that it was a 1-to-1 like problem on this. It's been a sort of consistent, maybe fundamental problem with the team. I don't think they have like personnel that was like greatly switched that. I don't know. Maybe look, this is all open for debate. I'm not, again, didn't think I would go crazy here defending Vaughn. I just think that most of these things were not totally egregious problems. Okay. We will be back again. Adam and I will be back after the Detroit game. Hopefully a W over the Pistons. Hopefully they're able to get this magic number to 1. Like I said before, hopefully they'll start being able to breathe a little easy ending into these last few games. Wouldn't mind just taking it easy for this last game and not have to worry and sweat it out too much. But that's what makes sports fun. That's what makes basketball fun too. You want some of the games to count. You want to play in games that mean something. The Nets are doing that. So I guess from that standpoint, that is what you can ask for. Appreciate everyone jumping into YouTube. Make sure you hit like and subscribe on your way out. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.